Welcome back to One Piece Explained. We just got the casting for a bunch of new characters that will debut in Season 2 of the One Piece live action by Netflix and Tomorrow Studios, and it's all pretty exciting. This is coming on the heels of the production supposedly having started filming this very week, or at the least getting ready to do so in the immediate future. In a video earlier this month, I did talk about everything we know about Season 2 so far, so if you haven't checked that out just yet, there will be a link on screen and in the description to a playlist with all of the Season 2 coverage that I have on the channel. As always, whenever I cover the live action, I try not to get into spoilers beyond the material that I'm talking about, so for this video, I'll be openly talking about the events of the Alabasta saga, and if you haven't made it through that just yet, I suggest you click out of the video to preserve your experience with the story. And whenever I end up talking about things beyond the scope of Alabasta, I'll be sure to drop an adequate spoiler warning so that you can skip ahead. So with that said, let's get into this casting. On June 25th, we got the reveal for a couple Baroque Works agents. Perhaps the most well-known name among this batch of casting is David Dastmalchian as Mr. 3. This is a pretty huge get for the live-action series, as Dastmalchian has been an incredibly popular actor over the last decade or so, having played various supporting roles in several blockbusters such as The Dark Knight, the Ant-Man movies, Dune, Oppenheimer, and even having a lead role in the recent horror film Late Night with the Devil. Now, a lot of people have actually been fan casting him as Mr. 3 for a while now, especially after his recent interview with Straw Hat Goofy where he said,
I would love to be a part of, if there was a way to be a part of something like One Piece, which is just so well done. Like, I love the world that they're building, and the fact that they have the ability to bring something to a live action space that still is true to the fact that getting shot with a cannonball, hit the way his skin stretches and everything. I'm like,
dude. I was like, this is One Piece, this is what I want. This is exactly what I want.
I would, as an actor, to me, those are the challenges that get very exciting.
Yeah.
You can find a link to the full interview in the description. Getting this casting for Mr. 3 is so exciting, as Dastmalchian really gives it his all in all of his roles and is just such a dynamic actor in general. Not only that, but he definitely looks the part. We were first teased about Mr. 3's inclusion in the series back at the start of May when they put out a quick video celebrating Luffy's birthday, as Iñaki brought out a cake with a candle that resembled Mr. 3's hair. Now, Mr. 3 is of course one of the primary antagonists of the Little Garden arc and is notably the mastermind of that whole operation, utilizing his wax fruit powers to mobilize our heroes and even the likes of giants, who we'll talk about later. After this point, he takes a bit of a backseat in the story and becomes a wild card, trying to get back into the good graces of Baroque Works and redeem himself in front of his boss, who of course does not care for him in the slightest after his failures and incompetence. Mr. 3 has a few appearances across the Alabasta saga after his initial moment in Little Garden, and even has a small cameo toward the very end amongst the crowd of people listening to Vivi's speech, so we should expect to see Dastmalchian a lot throughout the series. Now, several weeks ago when we got the casting description for Miss Golden Week, I was actually curious what would become of this character given how critical Miss Golden Week's abilities seem to be for the supposed plot of the Little Garden arc, and I even considered the chance that Mr. 3 would have an abbreviated presence there. But given this casting, I'm somewhat expecting them to really play into his star power. Sure, while he may not necessarily be a household name just yet, he is definitely a very big draw for fans of his work and fans who have seen him across various mainstream titles. If you've been following my coverage of the live action, you may be familiar with the idea that the second season could be split into two parts. I go more into why exactly this may be the case in my last video, so check that out if you're interested. And if we do get a split season, then Little Garden would be a decent cutoff point for the first half. Dastmalchian is a big enough star to play the role of a mini-boss before we ramp things up and get into Drum Island and Alabasta. Interestingly enough, we did not get the casting for his partner in crime, Miss Golden Week, and as I've talked about before, we do have some expectation for her to be in the series, given that casting description that was floating around a while back. It is very curious that she was not listed alongside Mr. 3 as Miss Valentine was with Mr. 5. It's hard to conclusively say what this means for that character, but I have to wonder if they're taking their time with announcing this casting because she's being played by another fairly big name celebrity, so we'll just have to see. We also got the casting for Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine, with the former being played by Cameron Johnson and the latter being played by Jazora Jaslyn. Some of you may recognize Johnson as having played Batwing in the CW Batwoman series, and Jaslyn from their role as Eliza Pendleton in the HBO Max show Warrior. We actually got brief casting descriptions for both of these characters back in May, as reported by What's on Netflix. Notably, both of these characters were listed as recurring characters at the time, which would make a lot of sense given their presence in both the Whiskey Peak arc and the Little Garden arc. However, I talked a lot about where I think they could show up after these arcs in my last video, so be sure to check that out if you're interested. And last but not least, we have Daniel Lasker playing Mr. 9. Lasker is probably most well known for the role as Furfur in Raised by Wolves, and Mr. 9 is of course the partner of Miss Wednesday, better known as Vivi, who we still have not yet got casting for. There have been speculated actresses for that role, but we'll get into all of that when she is officially announced, which hopefully should be soon. As far as the story goes, Mr. 9 does not really have much outside of the Reverse Mountain Oski Peak arcs, where I expect him to shine the most in this series, but there may be some more from him that the screenwriters could allude to, and I'll talk about that in just a bit. One bit that could be interesting is that the official account said this was our first look at who was playing the Baroque Works agents, and in one interpretation of this sentence, we can expect there to be even more casting for other agents down the line. But there's also a read where this is the entirety of the agents that we'll be seeing, and this is just our initial look at them. Though we do have good reason to believe that there will be more outside of this group, as we've talked about how Miss Golden Week is missing, despite us having discovered a casting description for her character, and as we all know, Miss All Sunday, better known as Nico Robin, is sure to be in this season as well. On top of that, there are still a ton of Baroque Works agents that were fairly important for the Alabasta arc itself, so we'll just have to see. Now, for the rest of this section, I'm going to be talking about some things that I hope could make their way into the series based on future developments past the Alabasta saga, so if you're not yet caught up to the series, please skip ahead to the next section. Alright, as we know, while Mr. 3 is the primary antagonist of the Little Garden arc, he becomes a bit of a supporting character in different contexts throughout the rest of the series. Most notably, he ends up among the group of escapees during the Impel Down arc and befriends Buggy the Clown. It would be amazing to see Desmalchin's Mr. 3 interact with Jeff Ward's Buggy in some capacity in this set of episodes. We expect Buggy to be in the season based on his central role during the Logetown arc, but in the source material, he doesn't have any appearances during the Alabasta saga at all. This could be a great opportunity to work him into another episode or two of the series, perhaps having his crew end up on Vacation Island, where they encounter Mr. 3 briefly, or even having the two meet up sometime after Little Garden, as Mr. 3 tries to make his way toward Alabasta. And yes, while this would technically mess with the canon for the Impel Down arc later on, it should be clear by now that the live action is not a one-to-one adaptation of the series, and is willing to make nods to or incorporate future events into the present day in some form, as we've seen with things like the inclusion of references to Nolan the Liar, the Burning Beast of Baltimore, and of course, Garp meeting the Straw Hats. I also think that we could get the start of the Miss Golden Week cover story adapted in some form, perhaps toward the end of the season. I've already discussed this a bit more in detail in my Everything We Know About Season 2 video, so I won't go crazy on it here, but this cover story allows us to revisit a lot of the Baroque Works agents after the defeat of Crocodile, especially Mr. 5, Miss Valentine, and Miss Golden Week, who are the central characters in the first part of that cover story. Mr. 3 also makes an appearance there as well, albeit a bit later. Now, Mr. 9 does not have too many appearances in the series after the Whiskey Peak arc, but we do learn from a Decks of the World cover story that he ends up settling down with Miss Monday and having a child. So hopefully, they do include her in the series alongside Mr. 8 or Igaram, and it would be pretty fun for them to allude to a romantic relationship between Monday and 9. The following day on June 26th, we got the casting for a couple of the older men in the season with Crocus and the Giants on Little Garden. Crocus was among the casting descriptions that we got a few weeks ago, and it looks like he'll be played by Clive Russell, who you may be familiar with from his portrayal of Brynden Tully in Game of Thrones. In that casting description, Crocus was the one character who was said to not be a recurring character, so I suspect we'll only see him during the Reverse Mountain arc episode. The giant Brogy is looking to be played by Brendan Murray, and Dorry will be played by Werner Kotzer. Dorry and Brogy are a pair of fan-favorite characters that end up further setting Usopp down his path to become a brave warrior of the sea, so I'm incredibly excited to see how they get brought to life. It's also important to note that this is further confirmation that Little Garden is indeed happening. We have gotten some hints at this since April with that video celebrating Usopp's birthday with Jacob, and of course there was the inclusion of Mr. 3 as well, but there easily could have been ways to include that character without necessarily touching on the Giants, so I'm more than happy to have solid confirmation that they will indeed be part of the plot. It's also going to be really fun to see how they handle the, well, giant aspect of the Giants. Many have been speculating the usage of CGI, but seeing as how we have actors that can look the part associated with these roles, I imagine we'll see some compositing and camera trickery to make them seem larger than life on top of that. In the source material, normal humans can fit in the palms of giants' hands, so I'm interested in seeing if that relative scale will be preserved, or if their size will be toned down a bit to be more manageable for the camera perspective. Either way, it's going to be a ton of fun. And on June 27th, we got 4 more castings revealed with Smoker, Tashigi, Wapol, and Dalton. Ever since the end of season 1, where we got our first tease of Smoker, fans have been speculating long and hard for who would play this fan favorite Marine, and we finally had the answer with Callum Kerr, who was in Monarchs. Alongside him, of course, is Tashigi, who you may be familiar with from the Fear Street movies. I've actually talked about both of these character story arcs and how they could be adapted into this season at length in my video about the Marine's presence in season 2, so be sure to check that out if you're interested in those thoughts. There'll be a link on screen and in the description. And lastly, we have castings for King Wapol and Dalton, with Wapol being played by Rob Coletti from The Many Saints of Newark and Tai Keogh from 24 Hours to Live. This casting in particular is very exciting, as this is our first confirmation that we will indeed be adapting the Drum Island arc in this season. Of course, the first announcement of the series getting renewed did include a nod to Chopper by Oda himself, but who knows what could have happened by the time the scripts were written. What's also interesting about this announcement in particular is that it alludes to Dalton's Devil Fruit ability, the Ox Fruit Model Bison. This is the first Zone Fruit introduced in the series, and it's really cool that Dalton will be able to have that prestige in the live action as well. All things considered, Dalton is a relatively small character in a story at large, and his Devil Fruit is often forgotten by most people, and as such, they could have easily chosen not to adapt it in the live action in order to cut down on costs and allocate resources to other aspects of the series. So learning that it may have made its way into the series nonetheless is really cool, and just goes to show how much the people behind the scenes care about every aspect of the story. Of course, there are plenty of other characters from the Drum Island arc as well that we'll be able to look forward to soon enough, between Kureha, Chopper, Hitterlook, and potentially even Chess and Kuro Marimo, and a few others, so we'll just have to stay tuned for that. Now, before we get going, there is one thing I'd like to talk about briefly, and that's whether or not Alabasta will actually even be part of this season. A lot of fans have been speculating that the Alabasta arc itself may be pushed off for season 3 in order to adequately cover all of the source material. After all, we've only gotten confirmation up to Drum Island so far, and while this is possible, I think it would be pretty difficult to stretch the Alabasta arc into 8 episodes, given that the pace they've been going at across the rest of the series. I'm more in the camp that we might be getting a split season, with the first half potentially ending with Little Garden or even Drum, allowing the entirety of the Alabasta climax to take place in the second half. But no matter what happens, even if we just get an 8-episode single season, just remember that the goal of the series is to adapt the source material, not to retell it in a one-to-one manner. There's definitely going to be major restructuring and reimagining of the various arcs across the saga in order to fit this medium that the show exists in, so we'll just have to see. It seems these few batches of casting are just the beginning, and from the verbiage used across these announcements, we'll hopefully get to see more in the future. Though do recall that there were several month gaps between casting announcements in season 1. There are still some major characters unaccounted for between Robin, Vivi, Crocodile, and even Ace, so there is a lot to look forward to in the coming months. Don't forget that filming just started, so we'll have a decent way to go before getting to the first teaser trailer or anything like that, but if there's any big news between then and now, you can be sure that I'll be covering it on the channel. If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much. I'd love to hear about what you think of these castings or any future castings in the comments. If you're new to the channel, be sure to like and subscribe so you can stay up to date with my weekly manga breakdowns and my live action coverage, and check out my in-depth breakdowns of the first season if you haven't yet already. Thank you so much for watching, stay safe, and I hope to see you in the next one.